Okay, we're live.
Great. Thank you, Cece. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this Digital Analytics Program webinar on analytics and accessibility. My name is Tim Loudon. I'm the Digital Analytics Program Manager. If you have been with us before, welcome back. If you are new to our webinars, welcome for the first time. I know that this topic maybe has drawn some folks to the webinar that are not our usual attendees, so thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I do want to note that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube Analytics playlist. And you'll be sent an email after the webinar is over, and it will contain both all of these slides as well as a link to the video and the rest of our videos that we always record. And in addition to all that, there will be a satisfaction survey so that you can present us with your comments or thoughts and let us know how you felt this webinar was. I would really, really appreciate it if folks could spend the 2 minutes or so that it takes to fill that out. It does help us make sure that we are catering these webinars so that it fits the needs of all of you out there. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is if you have any questions while I'm going through the content, feel free to put them in the chat box. And oh, we've got some things right here. Just so the DGU team knows, apparently the captioner is not hearing the audio, so hopefully we can get someone on that right away. If you have other questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat screen, and I will be going over here at the end of the webinar to make sure that I see it all. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Firstly, I want to be the first person to acknowledge that I'm not an accessibility subject matter expert. I'm just an analytics guy. This webinar has definitely taken me out of my comfort zone because I don't work with accessibility and for information or best practices on a regular basis, but it has been an incredible opportunity for me to learn more about it and also try to understand how we can use Google Analytics and specifically DAP to be able to get some more insight on the community, for the community who works on Section 508 or accessibility. One thing I did want to note is that there are a bunch of experts in this field, and you can find great information on section 508.gov, accessboard.gov, ada.gov, and also there's a new site, and I'll take this moment to give a little bit of a shameless plug to the team at GSA. The Accessibility Guild has provided an incredible resource at accessibility.digital.gov, which is a fantastic set of guidelines for you to make sure that you are ensuring your federal resources are accessible and inclusive. And it's based on what kind of work you do. So if you're a UX person, you can click here and you can go through all of the information to make sure that you're doing everything you can so that your site is designed for inclusivity and accessibility. And again, they have various different job titles that you could look at there. And all of your agencies probably have folks who are specifically working on Section 508, and they are much more knowledgeable than I and can help you out if you have questions about best practices. So with that, I did want to just put the language up here for what Section 508 is. And it's actually an amendment to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And without having to read this whole thing, basically, it requires federal agencies to make their electronic and information technological accessible to people with disabilities. And therefore, all of us, being that we work in the federal government, need to have Section 508 and accessibility in mind when we're creating our digital products. So what's the relationship between accessibility and analytics? And that is user experience. Really, the whole reason why we have analytics programs like Google Analytics in the first place are to make a better user experience, to make sure that our users are being able to achieve their goals and find the content they want to find. And just as you would use Google Analytics to try to understand or optimize for, say, mobile responsivity for folks that are using mobile, we also need to try to make sure that we are providing good experiences for those who may have vision impairments or blindness, and also may have dexterity or motor impairments. So there's this great quote that I found, and it's, when UX doesn't consider all users, shouldn't it be known as some user experience or sucks? Forgive my language. Um, and I felt like this was really, really pertinent to this particular topic because while it's true that folks who have disabilities or vision or dexterity impairments may constitute a relatively small amount of your traffic, it's important that, especially as the federal government, that those folks can find and access the information and services that the government offers just as well as anyone else. And full disclosure here, I actually literally went to Google and typed in UX quotes to try to find this. And I found the quote, thought it was perfect, and then saw that it was this person named Billy Gregory who had said it. And I then looked up Billy Gregory and found out that, in fact, he is well known in the accessibility community, and I believe he works out of Toronto, and he advocates for accessibility in digital products. So it's no wonder that he said the perfect quote here. So usually, when we're thinking about user experience and in the framework of Google Analytics, we think of things in a lot of different ways. We think about what kind of technology folks are using. So we might compare mobile usage versus desktop usage, or operating systems or browsers to make sure that everyone is experiencing our digital product the best they can. And in some cases, that might mean adjusting things for different browsers, or certainly adjusting things for resolution in terms of mobile or tablet or desktop. We think about things in terms of acquisition. So you want to make sure that your SEO, your search engine optimization, is optimized so that the folks that are typing in search terms in google.com or yahoo.com or Bing or whatever it may be, that they make sure they can find your site well. We may also consider things like language, if you have multiple languages on your site, to know which ones you should prioritize to translate content. Sometimes location, if you are trying to target a specific geographic area, or also sometimes demographics. If you've enabled the function to record age and gender of your users, sometimes you want to make sure that the, um, the experience is good for folks of a specific age or gender. So that's sort of the traditional view on user experience. We should obviously also consider the way people with impairments or disabilities interact with our websites for UX improvement. But how do we do that with Google Analytics? And I will tell you all, for the last 6 weeks, I've been trying to research this as much as possible. I've spoke with some people in the in the accessibility community. I've done a bunch of research online. And to be honest, I didn't find that much. It doesn't seem like Google Analytics specifically is a tool that has been traditionally used to try to improve user experience for this particular audience. And yeah, on one hand, that disheartened me because I thought it's really unfortunate that there aren't some best practices out there that we can try to leverage. But on the other hand, it was a bit exciting because it gave us the opportunity to try to find ways that maybe other folks haven't done. And there are, I should make a caveat. There are some things that people have done out there to be able to figure this out. And what I'm going to show you today, and a couple of the things are sort of variants of what other people have done. But there's not a whole lot of research out there on how to use Google Analytics for this purpose. So we're hoping that we can bring some knowledge to the federal government to help out. So traditionally in Google Analytics, if we wanted to understand how a specific group of people behaved on our site, we would use segments. So you could segment for mobile and tablet traffic, and then take a look at, for example, the average session time, the bounce rate, various different aspects of Google Analytics that would potentially help you understand the behavior, and then find out where there might be pain points, and you could then go do some A/B testing or some usability testing and try to improve them. Additionally, I gave an example here of organic traffic. You might want to segment for organic traffic to find out, of the people who were typing things into our into a search engine, what were they trying to accomplish on the site. But as I noted before, it's not so easy to segment for this audience. So the first thing that I think everybody thinks of, it's certainly what I thought of when I was thinking about how to attack this webinar, was what about detecting screen readers? And it turns out there's no reliable way to if someone's using a screen reader. And when you get the slides, you'll see I posted a few of the links here for some of the discussions that have been going on regarding that. But the basic description of why this happens is that there are varying different screen readers. Some of them are browser extensions, some of them are software, some of them are free, some of them aren't. They all focus, or they all sort of function in different ways, and there's no unique way for us to identify if a screen reader is being used. Unlike, for example, if a mobile device is being used, because the mobile device sends a sort of a specific technological fingerprint that Google Analytics can see and read. That doesn't happen with the screen reader. And that might be a good thing, that we can't specifically determine whether or not folks are using screen readers. So what do we do then? Well, thanks to a helpful user, and shout out to Atul Varma if he's watching this. He's a former GSA employee. He let us know, and I'll click on this here. He let us know that, whoops, remind me later for this. Our link auto tracker, previously, our old link auto tracker, was not actually recording clicks if they were used from, or if they were clicked with the enter key rather than with a mouse or a trackpad or a touch. And so this was definitely a problem. Basically, we were excluding clicks on all of our automatic events that you have in DAP. So that's outbound links, downloads, mail to, outbound downloads, various different things like that. All of those were tracking when someone clicked a mouse or a trackpad or clicked with their finger on a mobile phone, but they were not actually tracking the amount of times that link was clicked by using the keyboard, by using the enter key. So we definitely needed to fix that problem. We needed to make sure that we were able to track all of those clicks. And the reason why was that it's important to make sure we were getting the data from folks who were strictly keyboard users. And when people are using the keyboard to navigate the web, it usually means one of the following. One, they have visual impairments or blindness, so they might be using a screen reader. Two, they potentially have motor or dexterity impairments, so using the tab key is preferred because you don't have to move your hand or your fingers around. Or, and this is the big or, this is the big what if, they are potentially just, a person who does not have any visual or motor or dexterity impairments, but they're a power user who just prefers to use the keyboard over the mouse or trackpad. I would say in my personal anecdotal experience, I don't see a lot of folks who are moving around through the web using the tab button, but they exist, and we have to understand that, because when we get into some of the things we'll do later, it's important to understand that this is not a 100% perfect picture. It's more of a directional proxy for folks. So I'm just going to refer to everyone who fits into these three categories from now on as keyboard users. So Atul said, we need to also track clicks from keyboard users, and that totally made sense. I do want to take a second to show you what it looks like for those of you who are not in the accessibility or 508 community and you're analytics people, and you haven't actually tried to see what navigating the web looks like when you're using a screen reader or pressing tab. I do want to demonstrate it quickly. So I'm going to go to USA.gov, and I happen to be using a Mac. And if you use a Mac, there is a built-in screen reader program called VoiceOver, which I just found out about after speaking with some great folks at USA.gov accessibility team. And if you hit Command F5, you can start it up. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and start up VoiceOver and then do a quick demo of what it looks like for you.
Welcome to VoiceOver. VoiceOver speaks descriptions of items on the screen and can be used to control the computer using only your keyboard. If you already know how.
So now I'm going to hit the
Visit
tab
internal
key.
link. Skip to main content. U.S. flag image. An official website of the United States government. Here's how you know. Collapsed button. Visited link image. USA governor logo. Search. Search edit text. Search button. List 2 items. Link. Contact us. Link. 1844 USA GOV1. List 7 items. link, all topics and services, about the U.S., collapsed button, benefits, grants, loans, collapsed button, government agencies and elected officials, collapsed button, jobs and unemployment, collapsed button, money and credit, collapsed button, travel and voiceover off.
Okay, so I feel like that was a pretty demonstrative example there. You can see that when you're using a screen reader, and this particular screen reader, you can have it set to just rotate through all of the elements on the page, or you can, right now I'm hitting tab. As you're watching the focus on the elements change, it's because I'm hitting tab. So hitting tab and enter are the main ways that you move about if you're a keyboard user. And there are also some shortcuts and things that some of the accessibility folks told me about, but I won't go over right now. So as I'm moving through, you could either be using the screen reader or maybe I'm just tabbing myself, but I can move through all the elements on the page one by one. And if you're using a screen reader, you saw how tedious it could be because you have to go through every single thing. And if there's a menu at the top that happens on every single page, that's a lot of stuff that it needs to rotate through. And we're going to talk more about that a little later. But I did want to just demonstrate that. So what did we do here? We said, okay, the first thing we need to do is make sure that we are able to account for clicks that are happening by a keystroke. But then beyond that, we actually said it would be great to be able to discern between the two. To be able to say, okay, well, this link was clicked with a mouse click versus this link was clicked by hitting the return key. So we created a custom dimension, which is in DAP version 4.0. We released version 4.0 a few months ago. And if you're calling your code from our hosted location at dap.digitalgov.gov, you are using version 4.0. You could check your site and see if you're using version 4.0 by looking in your HTML or your tag manager system. And if you're not, please contact us so we can get you the information to switch. But so in our most recent code version, you can now actually discern for all of our events, and it's only our events. It's the outbound download, mail to, all those particular things that we track by default. You can add a dimension on called interaction type, and it will tell you whether or not the click happened via a mouse or a keyboard. And I'll show you this in just a second. But how does this work? So basically, what we've done is we have the event listener, the JavaScript event listener, to look for special JavaScript events called mouse down and key down. And so when there's a link that our auto tracker is tracking, it will determine whether or not mouse down or key down as a JavaScript event was fired and attach it to that click in the custom dimension. And I have some information here that you can read about when you get these slides. You can click on mouse down or key down links and you can read more about them. And so one of the questions we got was, well, does this work for mobile devices? And in theory, it does. Most mobile browsers emulate a mouse click if you click with your finger by firing the mouse down event, even though there isn't actually a mouse or a trackpad for that event to fire. They do it just because they know people would want to track clicks that way. And we've checked, and we do see data coming in for keystroke on mobile browsers and mobile devices as well. And I'm pretty sure that would happen because someone either has an attached keyboard, or there may be certain screen readers where you can actually use the internal tablet keyboard that pops up on like half the screen when you're doing it. Admittedly, we're trying to find out more information about that, but there is data coming in for both keystroke and mouse down for mobile and tablet devices. Okay, so moving back here, let me show you how this works. I'm gonna get rid of some of my extra tabs here. So I'm in our DAP Google Analytics account right now, and I'm in the GSA agency profile. And you can see here, I went to top events. Oops, doesn't go back anymore. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so I was in the top events, and I clicked on outbound downloads. there were 3.8 total outbound downloads in the time period I'm looking at. And you'll notice that I'm looking at a pretty long time period. I've got April through June here. So I encompassed a few months. We implemented the interaction type with version 4.0. So it may be April that we actually pushed it. So here I've got, there were 2.5 million PDFs that were clicked and 356,000 Word docs and things like that. And so what I can do here in the events section is I can add a secondary dimension for interaction type. When that happens, it's going to add, and you'll see here, the top 10 were all specific extensions of a download with a mouse click. But if I extend it a little bit and we get down here, we can see there were actually 621 PDFs where the link was download or was clicked with the enter key keystroke rather than the mouse click. And then here's where you start seeing all the enter keys appear. So we have data on both, and not only do we have data on both, but we also have information about how the click happened. And that is really cool because of what we can do with Google Analytics segments, which I'm going to show you next. So you could go to, say, for example, any specific PDF. If I click through PDF here, it'll then break it down into all the individual ones. And right now, I'm just looking across the entire GSA profile. And for those of you that are not common DAP or Google Analytics users, or you haven't been to our other trainings, I understand that this might be a little foreign to you, but we can refer you to all of our other trainings to understand a little bit more about what's going on here. But so here's the form that was downloaded the most. And if I click on this, it will isolate this particular form. Okay, so now I've got the DS82. And if I then add interaction type here, it will show me for this specific form how many times it was loaded with a mouse click versus the enter key keystroke. So you can see here the vast majority, 99.96%, have been with a mouse click, but there were 43 downloads from an enter key keystroke in this time period. Okay. So you can see this is sort of what we get here. We start getting mixed data. And now, because this event, or I'm sorry, because of this custom dimension, we can, if we have a little bit of a more advanced understanding of how Google Analytics segments work, we can create segments for keyboard users. And this is really, this is the yes moment, because when we can create segments for keyboard users, we can apply that segment as you would just like a mobile segment for mobile visits coming from mobile devices or something like that. And you can see the behavior of that particular audience. So this is how you do it, and I'm going to just show you in our interface here. So I'm in the GSA agency profile. I'm at the page where you're actually configuring, or at the section where you actually configure the segment. But what you would do is click up here to click Add Segment, and then you would hit New Segment, Create New Segment. And we've got all of the normal things you could choose here. You have to go down to Conditions, because that's the advanced section. So there's two things we need to do when creating this specific segment. The first one is we need to specify it to whatever site you are interested in. So in this case, I'm going to use USA.gov, and I'm creating a filter to say include sessions where the landing page starts with USA.gov. Now, you could do this in various different ways. You could say where the landing page contains USA.gov, and that would encompass any subdomains like publications.usa.gov or something like that. You could also probably switch this to hostname if you wanted, but in this case, it works to use landing page. So anytime someone lands on a page that starts with usa.gov, that it will be filtered into this segment. But then also I clicked and I added and I typed in interaction type, because now we have that slot in our custom dimensions. And I want it to exactly match, and this is the exact verbiage of how we have this encoded. It's either mouse click or enter key keystroke. So if I say the landing page has to be usa.gov and you have to have an interaction type where it exactly matches enter key keystroke. I'm now effectively creating a segment for folks that visited USA.gov, and there was an event like an outbound link click or a download that was done with the enter or return key. Okay, so now I'm going to hit save. And Google Analytics is probably going to, oh, it went pretty quick. So we can see here, if I then go to the audience overview, I've got 365 sessions in this time period. And again, it's a pretty long time period here. So we need to talk about the total numbers that you're getting. But 365 sessions and 1,300 page views, 1,351, where somewhere in the session, a session being when the time from a period, or the period of time from when someone entered into a site to when they left the site, we're getting 1,351 page views where sometime during that session, they fired an event with an enter key. So this is a way to, that doesn't mean that every link they clicked was with the enter key, so we don't know that, but it means at some point they use the enter key. So it's a proxy for your keyboard users. And then once you create this segment, you can go through any other normal thing that you would check throughout all of the Google Analytics interface, and the segment will be persistent. So if I want to see what channels those people came from, those particular sessions, I can click the channels button, and I can see that, I think it's going to show me that organic is a big one. Take a note down here where the average session duration, so that's 7 minutes and 31 seconds. That's quite a bit longer than the normal session duration that includes all sessions. And that makes sense because folks that are keyboard users, some of them are probably using screen readers, and it takes a little bit longer to get to the page. So as I noted, we can go here and see where that traffic came from, or what devices it was on, or which campaigns they came from. Any of the normal things that you would look at, you can also see with this segment on. One thing that I do want to note is that we should be very careful about comparing benchmarks for the entire all sessions segments, the segment that includes all traffic, versus something like this, where we have a segment for keyboard users. As I noted, the session duration is understandably probably a bit longer. And so it's not really something that you'd want to do to compare the average session duration of your keyboard users versus your average session duration of non-keyboard users or all users. That doesn't really make sense. Instead, what you should do is probably over time make comparisons of behavior within this segment. So if you're looking to improve the accessibility on your site, you may want to target specific metrics that you're looking to improve upon. And that could be various different things. It depends on the goals of your site. I'm not even gonna speculate what they may be, but just as you would use any other segment to try to improve user experience for a specific audience, that's how you would use this one. Although keep in mind, it's not good to make a comparison to the broader audience. Okay, so this is pretty cool. We get to make a segment for an audience that I think we've never been able to really see behavior for before. And I've included here a video of our segments webinar. If that was really over your head, and understandable if it was, we have a whole other webinar that's an hour long where you can click here to see how to create segments. So, but wait, there's more. As I mentioned, when I was preparing for this webinar, I was speaking to some great folks, Dave Stanger and David Kaufman from the USA.gov analytics and accessibility teams, respectively. And I'm sorry, I switched those. Dave Kaufman works on the analytics team, and Dave Stanger works on the accessibility team. And they clued me into something they were doing that I think is really awesome. And I want to show you that as well. So there's going to be something else we can do here. I, not being a person that works frequently in the accessibility community, was unaware of this really cool feature where you have a modal that shows the skip to main content button, or link, I should say. So let me demonstrate that here. If I reload USA.gov. So if I'm a keyboard user, and I'm not going to turn on the screen reader again. I'm just going to use tab. If I'm a keyboard user, the way I navigate this site or any site is by using the tab key. As I noted before, if you have to tab through the same menu every single time you load a page, that can get a bit tedious. And all this stuff too, it tabs from USA.gov logo to the search box to contact us to the number and then through all of this. So as I noted, I was unaware of this, but an accessibility best practice is to do the following. If I hit tab one time, the first time I hit tab, if you look up in the top left corner up here, I get a little link that says skip to main content. So what this does is it will automatically jump me past all of this stuff that's universal and global across the site, and it will bring me down to the main content. So this could prove very, very useful for someone who's a keyboard user to not have to go through the tedium of clicking through all of those, tabbing through all of those options. So if I were to hit the enter key right now on the skip to main content modal that appears, it brings me down past that and right to the how do I section, and I can start clicking through the main content of this particular page. So this is really awesome as just a practice in general. But even better is that the USA.gov team is really smart. And what they did is actually encode a custom event that fires when skip to main content is clicked. So what's great about this is that theoretically, as soon as someone sees this thing, they are a keyboard user. Because if I didn't even know they existed, because I'm not strictly a keyboard user, in fact, I'm a very rare keyboard user. So the reason I didn't know it existed is because if I'm moving around with my trackpad or a mouse, I never see that modal that says skip to main content. And to be honest, I don't think I had ever seen that modal on any sites because that's not something I typically do. So when you hit tab and that appears, only keyboard users ever see this modal. So by encoding a custom event on specifically this link, you effectively create an event that, in the same way we did with the custom dimension, you're able to segment for events or sessions where that event happened. And I mean, that's a pretty awesome thing. So let's take a look at this. Oh, and I should mention, the USA.gov team uses Google Tag Manager, and encoding a custom event on a specific link like this in tag managers, whether it be Google Tag Manager or Telium or whatever, is super, super simple, and probably the way that I would go. But if you don't use a tag manager, you can write some JavaScript to create a custom event and send it to your Google Analytics account that you'll need to insert into your HTML. But that's for another day. So let's show you what they've done here. With that particular event now firing, I can go over here into my other window, and their particular language, because when you set a custom event, you need to set the event category, the event action, and potentially the event label if there is one. So in this case, they have an event category that's like USA Gov Interactive. And then they have an event action specifically for when that link, they call it the skip nav. So specifically when that link is clicked, it fires an event. So now we can go up here and say, I want to create a segment where where we're going to include sessions where the landing page is USA.gov, and somewhere in that session, there was an event action called USA Gov Skip Nav selected that happened. And again, that's just the terminology they happen to use. If you create a custom event for this, you can use whatever terminology you'd like. So then, if we hit save here, we can get a segment for all those users. And one thing that you might notice, if I go into the audience overview, is that there's actually more sessions included in this segment than there were in the one that I just demonstrated. So now we have 545 sessions. And my first reaction is, well, why does that happen? Why are they different? And then I thought about it for a second, and it makes sense. And here's the reason why. In my other segment, I told you the custom dimension for interaction type is tied to the event that constitutes our auto event tracker, right? So the person who's on the site has to click on an outbound link, meaning a link that you have on your page that leads outside of your site, or click on a download or something like that. So in the case that a user came to the site and did not trigger an event with a download or an outbound link or a mail to click, we aren't able to get the keyboard users who don't do that in this segment because it's tied to that. So the difference here is this does not rely on an event to happen because it's an event itself, but it's an internal event. It's anytime someone clicks on that link, and that link is just an anchor tag. It just sends people further down the page where they've attached an anchor link. So in this case, they get even more sessions because you don't have to trigger an event like an outbound download, which would mean if someone came to USA.gov, they clicked the skip navigation, the skip to main content link, and then they left of their own volition. They clicked somewhere else, whatever, or that they went to the URL bar and put in a different site or went back to Google. If they click that skip navigation, then you already have them included in the segment. So we get a little bit more information for this particular segment, which I think is great. The other thing that's interesting to note is that the USA.gov team specifically created this custom event as what we call a non-interaction event. That's important if you're looking at bounce rate, because there are two kinds of events, an interaction event or a non-interaction event. If you encode a custom event as an interaction event, when that event fires, it will automatically negate a bounce. And some of you I know on the call are saying, what's a bounce? We need to figure this out. A bounce is when you come to a site and only view one page and then you leave. That's called a bounce, when you don't view more than one page. So with the method that I described earlier with our custom dimension, there's a zero bounce rate because the events that we have encoded that are tied to this custom dimension all are interaction events, meaning once an event fires, you can't have a bounce. Whereas the USA.gov method here of checking that skip navigation, since they encoded it as a non-interaction event, it does not negate a bounce, and so you can get an accurate bounce rate. And you can see the bounce rate is actually very, very low for this particular segment, which is a good thing. It means that probably you've done a lot of things that are making it so the keyboard users are comfortable with using it. So that, I think, is a really incredible second method of trying to do this. Now, if you don't have one of those skip to main content modals that appears, one, I would say try to do it. And two, I would say if you don't, you could use the method I showed you with our the user interaction dimension. OK, now, so today's BOGO segment for Keyboard Users Day. You came here to figure out how to do one way, and we gave you 2 ways. So you're welcome for that. But there's something else that I found, and I literally found it an hour before the webinar started. And I wanted to make mention of it because I think it's great. So apologies that I don't have more slides on it, but here's breaking news. I was just goofing around going to various different federal websites, and I happened to go to FDA.gov. And on FDA.gov, I wanted to see if they also used the skip navigation technique. And it seems, for what it's worth, it seems like the vast majority of federal websites that I've checked do have that, that skip to main content modal that appears. But on the FDA site, and kudos to the folks at FDA if any of you are on the call right now, if I hit tab, watch what happens. Here's one time. So skip to main page content. But if I hit it again, instead of just going down to the logo or some of the content, there are more options. Skip to the search box. Skip to the topics menu. Skip to the common links. Then it goes down to the various different aspects of the page. And you can see me tabbing through home, food, drugs, medical devices, and so on. So what really struck me about this was that immediately I thought, OK, number one, it just seems like it's great for folks who are keyboard users to be able to not have to worry about only skipping to the main content, but being able to skip, for example, to the search box, skip to the topics menu or the common links. I think this is really phenomenal. But the other thing that jumped into my mind is that from here, you could code a custom event for every one of these. And again, they're just anchor links. They're an anchor link that takes you down here, or if I click skip to search, it takes me to an anchor for the search box where I can type something in. So you could, especially if you had a tag manager, this would only take like 15 minutes. You could create an event for every single one of these. Oops, it went away. Common links, topics menu, search, and main page content. And then what that would do is allow you to see, for your strictly keyboard users, what are most of the people trying to do? Are they trying to read content, or do they come to the home page and they really want to go to the search box to look up some specific drug or something like that? Or do they want to go to the topics menu, and so on? So sorry to spring this on the folks at FDA if they're on the call right now, but I think you're doing a great job, and I would love to hear if you all are able to code an event for every single one of these clicks so that you could get a better understanding of what your keyboard users are trying to accomplish. I think that would be really beneficial. So that was, there's my mind blown GIF here. I think that was, an hour before this webinar, I said, I got to add a couple more slides because this is a really cool thing to show. So now we have, from this webinar, 2 different ways to fire an event and or a custom. Well, you already have a custom dimension for interaction type, so you can segment for keyboard users. If you have your other way, your other skip to main content option modal, you could check that. And then if you have something that was, when I mentioned this to somebody, he said, this is like the skip navigation on steroids. If you have something like this, you can really use it to optimize sort of what your keyboard users are trying to accomplish. So 3 different little hacks that we can use to try to solve this really unresearched problem. So what have we learned today? One, there's currently no built-in functionality within Google Analytics to be able to track behavior and improve user experience for the accessibility community, the folks who are mainly keyboard users. Although I should mention that I want to acknowledge that keyboard users are not the entirety of the community for which 508 compliance applies, and so this was just one specific aspect. 2, we figured out a couple tricks. Actually, now we have a few tricks that can give you some insight, but they aren't 100% perfect. So again, it's just a couple different ways that we can try to get some understanding of behavior of keyboard users, but keyboard user does not necessarily mean that the person has an impairment or a disability or they're using assistive technologies. It may just be that they're a power user who likes the keyboard. 3, statistical significance is a consideration to keep in mind. So what you saw as I was going through my different options is that an incredibly small percentage of the users were coming up in those segments. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. And, if you're trying to make major decisions based on this data, a data scientist would tell you you definitely need to have enough data to make it statistically significant. If you are taking this information as something that's more directional and you're trying to use it for context, that's one thing, but make sure that you at least understand that if you have an incredibly low number of sessions where this happens, it may not be something you want to make major decisions based off of. And 4, and I think this is the most important to take away from this webinar, usability testing remains a needed practice for this audience and all audiences. So actually seeing how folks with a dexterity impairment or with a visual impairment can maneuver around your site is the best way to understand the sort of snags that they may hit. And additionally, Google Analytics, while it's very powerful, and believe me, I'm like, one of the biggest GA proponents in government, it shouldn't be your only tool. It should be used in a suite of tools with both with A/B testing and with maybe heat mapping and usability testing all in combination for you to have the best picture of the behavior for this particular audience and all audiences. So with that, I just wanted to note that since we didn't find a whole lot of stuff online about this, we would love to hear from you if your teams are already doing things or have thoughts, opinions, ideas on how we can better use Google Analytics for this particular audience to make sure that we are optimizing for the user experience for the folks that definitely need to also be able to easily access the content and information. I just wanted to, again, super huge thank you to David Kaufman and Dave Stanger of the USAGov accessibility team. And for those of you watching and you've seen a couple times, I wrote A11Y. That's the shorthand for accessibility because there are 11 letters between the A and the Y in the word accessibility. So people say A11Y. I don't know. I'm not cool enough to pull that off. But so thanks to Dave Kaufman and Dave Stanger and also Atul Varma for the initial issue that brought up the fact that we weren't recording those key down events. And we fixed it. And then hopefully we went a little further to make it more beneficial. So at this point, we can look for questions. It's 10:02, so we've got a little bit of time. Also, when you all get the slides, I encourage you to read this. It's an account of someone who is not visually impaired trying to use a keyboard for a day and talking about how difficult it is. So it's a really valuable read, really puts you in the shoes of someone who is a keyboard user. You can always contact us, dap@support.digitalgov.gov, with your questions. Okay, let me go to... Oh, look at this. Okay, let's see if we've got any questions. Yes, Marissa, I think that you're right. I mean, there's definitely discussions out there about if you could track screen readers themselves, that potentially is not always a good thing. So that's definitely true. And anybody with questions here? Oh, here's a great one from Bruce. Screen reader power users don't only use the tab key. For example, JAWS lets users navigate by headings. Aha. Okay, Bruce brings up a great point here. JAWS is a specific screen reader software that is, as I understand from talking with some folks, the top screen reader software, but it does cost money. I think it's like $1,000. So I was not able to test that, but that's really great to know. So it's not always that folks use the tab key, but I agree with you, Bruce. I don't think that not hitting the tab key would invalidate the segments that we set up today. Okay, and it looks like there's not other questions at this point. So again, if those of you, if you have questions and you maybe just didn't necessarily want to raise them in the chat, feel free to email us, dap@support.digitalgov.gov. And I hope for all of you attending that this was somewhat illuminating. I definitely sympathize that I wish there were more information about how to use analytics for accessibility, but I think we've got a great start here. And we at the DAP team definitely are now committed to trying to research more things that we can do to be able to improve user experience for the Section 508 folks and those with visual and dexterity impairments. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope that we can catch you on our next webinar, which is coming up next month. Also, we have a few bonus webinars that we're working on that we'll be announcing soon, so keep your eye out for that. And please, please, please fill out the survey that's going to be sent out to you shortly after the webinar. It would really make our day. So have a great week, everyone. Take care.